Hello and welcome to today's ICMA University web conference, Promoting Solar Energy Use Through Local Plans. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, David Morley, AICP Senior Research Associate, Planning Advisory Service Coordinator and Co-Editor, Zoning Practice for the American Planning Association. David, it's all yours.
Thanks, Amelia. Hi, everybody. This is David Morley. Welcome to today's webinar, Promoting Solar Energy Use Through Local Plans, which is sponsored by the U.S. Department of Energy's Sunshot Solar Outreach Partnership. The Solar Outreach Partnership, or Solar Ops for short, is a DOE initiative designed to increase the use and integration of solar energy into communities nationwide. The partnership's activities include outreach, educational programs and materials, and technical assistance. You can learn more about the partnership and its activities by visiting the Solar Ops website at solaroutreach.org. Today's webinar is the second in a three-part series on the theme of promoting solar energy use through local planning. The series is rooted in a recent set of American Planning Association briefing papers, which are available at the web address shown on screen here, along with a number of other APA resources related to planning for solar. The first webinar of the series explained why it's important for communities to plan for solar energy use and offered guidance to planners, public officials, and solar advocates to help them initiate and facilitate conversations about solar in their communities. The final webinar in the series, which will be held on November 1st, will focus on solar-friendly development regulations. Today we'll be talking about promoting solar energy use through local plans. We're going to hear about the types of plans that can promote solar use, where within these plans solar information can be introduced. Then we're going to hear from representatives from two different communities who will share their experiences incorporating solar energy into various local plans. The last part of the program, as Amelia mentioned, is devoted to your questions. So throughout the webinar, please do submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A tab. Just type your question in and select Ask, and we'll do our best to provide as many answers as possible during the program. Joining us today is my colleague, Erin Musial, Senior Program Development and Research Associate with the American Planning Association in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Erin.
Hello, thanks.
And we also have with us Steve Abraham, Planning Manager, and Kent Taylor, Director of Open Space and Trails with Pinal County, Arizona. Welcome, guys.
Yep, hello. Hello, thanks for having us. Yep.
And we also have with us Nate Geisler, Energy Programs Associate with Ann Arbor, Michigan's Energy Office. Welcome, Nate.
Thanks. Great to be here.
And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Erin.
Okay, thanks, David. As planners, we help communities prepare all types of plans. These plans can be grouped into three categories. The first is comprehensive plans, also called general or master plans, which we know serve as the foundational policy document for local governments. The second type of plan is a sub-area plan, or a plan done on a smaller scale and at a more detailed level. Some examples of these type of plans include neighborhood plans, downtown plans, and corridor plans. The third type of plan is a functional plan. Functional plans focus on specific topics like climate action plans, energy plans, or sustainability plans. Solar energy initiatives can be integrated into all or any of these plans during the initial stage of plan development or through amendments to existing plans. Community members can provide input in terms of where in the plan energy-related information is discussed and the types of information included in the plan. Typical places to incorporate solar energy include the plan vision, the background or existing conditions assessment, and the goals, objectives, policies, action items, and implementation strategies. Community visioning should serve as the first step in the plan development process. The visioning process helps the community recognize its shared values and purposes and articulate a shared vision of the community. During this process, planners should gauge the level of awareness, importance of renewable energy and energy-related topics like solar energy in the community, and encourage the community to capture them in the plan vision or vision statement. This vision guides plan development and identifies the elements of higher priority within the plan document. Another common place to incorporate solar energy is in the background or existing conditions assessment. In this section, communities can establish a baseline for energy use, like documenting greenhouse gas emissions or the amount of solar energy being produced. This information is critical to setting energy goals and tracking and measuring progress toward achieving these energy goals over time. It is in this section where a community can also document its existing solar resources, like how many solar energy systems there are in the community and where they are located. Some communities have used solar resource maps to assist in this effort. Finally, in this section, communities can raise awareness about solar energy and educate residents about economic, technological, and geographic solar characteristics. An example of an economic characteristics could be information on the number of solar-related jobs and businesses in the community. Technological characteristics could include information on different types of solar energy systems and how they work. Geographical characteristics could include information on the most suitable sites for solar in the community. I included this slide just to show some examples of how communities have integrated solar into the background or existing conditions assessment section of the plan. In Hartford, Vermont, they include a general discussion of energy impacts in the energy chapter of their master plan. Huntington Beach, California details its solar education and outreach efforts in their energy plan. Jackson County, Oregon discusses the regional viability of solar thermal systems. King County, Washington educates residents by discussing the benefits and barriers to solar energy. Lansing, Michigan hits on some co-benefits of solar by addressing how solar installations can be part of a larger vacant land reuse strategy. Finally, Mecklenburg County, North Carolina has documented its existing solar resources. They state the number of solar thermal installations they have on county facilities and their effect on reducing energy usage. Solar energy can also be incorporated into plan goals, objectives, policies, action items, and implementation strategies that together establish a community-wide strategy for achieving the community's desired vision. These strategies provide a set of instructions that will guide elected officials through the decision-making process. Topics to consider addressing in this section of the plan include solar access, solar incentives, and preferential locations for new solar energy systems. This slide offers some examples of communities that have included solar in their plan goals. Some communities, like Haley, Idaho, and Jackson, Wyoming, have general goals related to increasing renewable energy production and reducing non-renewable energy consumption. Other communities, like Arlington County, Virginia, Kansas City, Missouri, and Portland, Oregon, have more detailed and measurable solar energy goals related to how many megawatts of solar they will install by a certain year, the percentage of electricity that will come from renewable sources, and increasing energy efficiency across all sectors of the city. This slide shows some of the objectives, policies, action items, and implementation strategies communities have developed that address solar energy. Some include changes within other elements of the comprehensive plan, like in Hillsborough County, Florida, where they have created a new land use category and amended their future land use map to provide space for renewable energy production. In Reading, Massachusetts, they included an action item to identify and map locations that would be ideal for solar or other renewable energy projects. Some communities, like Goodyear, Arizona, identified partnerships to enhance the use of solar energy. Finally, other communities like Amherst, Massachusetts, and Lake Oswego, Oregon, recommended amendments to their zoning ordinance to incentivize and mandate renewable energy use, like requiring solar orientation for new subdivisions. Now that I've provided some quick examples of how and where communities have integrated solar energy into their local plans, I will now turn it over to our community representatives so they can describe their personal experiences in more detail. First, Stephen Kemp will describe their efforts in Pinal County, Arizona, and then Nate will describe their experience in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Erin. And Erin, David, thank you for inviting Kent and I to this to talk about one of my favorite subjects and how we arrived at where we are with our comprehensive plan. Pinal County, Arizona, just to give us give the group a little background of where we're at in the context of the larger state there. We're located in south central Arizona, and on the map there highlighted on the Google map. 5,300 square miles, third most populous county, and last count put it about 375,000. Interestingly enough, we have 11 incorporated towns and cities within our county boundaries, and those 11 incorporated towns and cities have their own jurisdictions and their own zoning requirements. But then we have also several unincorporated population centers that all kind of form the county as a whole. Now, in particular, what I wanted to discuss is our 2009 comprehensive plan. And just to start off with a bang here, that in our comprehensive plan, we have adopted language that basically says solar and wind energy and other renewable energy production should be viewed as compatible with our farming heritage. And I think that's really important to forwarding the renewable energy idea in Pinal County, because the bulk of the county is still farming. And this really sets up that vision, that forward vision, and that it really guides all the rest of the policies and goals that come after that. Deeper into the comprehensive plan, in particular for the folks listening today, Chapter 7, environmental stewardship in our comp plan is a whole battery of environmental, green, and sustainability concepts. In particular, there are 3 goals, 4 objectives, and 6 policies that deal directly with renewable energy and solar. Which leads to, I believe, a very solar-friendly comprehensive plan and zoning situation. And it really came up through a really unique configuration of events as part of the adoption of the 2009 comprehensive plan. There were some changes in state law. The ACC, which is the Arizona Corporation Commission, which I'll discuss them in a little bit, had some changes and some policy or some laws that they adopted. The utility companies had some changes in the way that they approached things. Our policy documents internally combined with grassroots efforts from the community at large. And then also our Board of Supervisors really championed the idea of sustainability and green energy production. So how do we get here? In particular, the state law. It requires, this is Arizona Revised Statutes, Title 11, requires an energy element in the comprehensive plan. And it's very broad, but particular enough that we can create our own community-centered requirements that still meet the concept of state law and forward our individual goals as well. B being the most important there, being identified policies and practices for greater use of renewable energy. Also, the ACC, the Arizona Corporation Commission, required regulated utilities to generate 15% of their power by renewable means by 2025. So those two things at the state level really help drive some of the changes we made to our comprehensive plan. Now, the comprehensive plan itself, it was a complete overhaul and modernization of our comprehensive plan. The previous comprehensive plan that we had prior to 2009 was really unprepared, and it wasn't an effective tool to deal with the explosive growth that the county was experiencing. But to that end, it took about a year and a half to get through the process, investing it with the community and going through the neighborhood outreach and really getting to unprecedented outreach effort. Also, roughly the same time, there was a grassroots citizen effort called Sustainable Pinal Citizen Task Force that started and had its roots in certain parts of our county that were interested in those sustainability ideas. But then a supervisor and then the Board of Supervisors at large really latched onto the idea and forwarded that concept. With some help from staff, the Pinal Citizen Task Force really started to take shape, and they came into a functioning recommending group They have no legal authority, but then we look to them to come up with ideas on how to push policies forward and get them into our comp plan and other county activities as well. Also, because of that change in the requirement with the ACC on the regulated utilities, SRP adjusted, and SRP is Salt River Project. They're a major power generator in the state, along with APS. But SRP was the power company that we saw the most change in, where they kind of changed their business model a little bit, where they looked to the private sector to generate the power, and then they would distribute it. So they would put requests for proposals out there to private companies and private landowners to create solar facilities that are utility grade, and then they would handle the distribution of the power. This next slide is basically our website, pinalcountyaz.gov. Going Green is the page here. That this is the website devoted to the Going Green effort and the Sustainable Pinal. And you can see on this website that there are a lot of things that deal with county operations and also with green, sustainable, environmental responsibility type ideas. So that's kind of those ideas that the Sustainability Task Force came up with have made their way into the county's website and our general business practices. Utility-grade solar projects. And I want to touch on this because back to the point about SRP and the ACC kind of drove our change in our policy documents. We don't have a legal definition of what a utility-grade solar project is, but what it is generally in line with other requirements in our zoning ordinance that deal with other type of solar projects. It's not a residential use or an accessory use, and it's primarily used for the generation of power and for the use of the general public off-site generation of power. And it's generally multiple megawatt type facilities and much greater capacity than your typical roof-mounted residential facility. But I'll talk about the residential facilities in a little bit. The regulatory environment that we have right now for these large-scale facilities, the comprehensive plan in terms of land use maps, it's the purple color on our map. Also, public services and facilities, which is blue. Usually those are processed as a major amendment, and for folks outside Arizona, a major amendment is a substantial change in our comprehensive plan that takes approximately a year to accomplish. And there's a much more stringent review of a proposal. It's a pretty big deal. The zoning that is required for these facilities is industrial use category with a PAD, sometimes with industrial use permit depending on the category that they request or that is existing on the property. After zoning is taken care of, there's a typical site plan review and a building permit, which is an administrative process. So out of those 4 bullets there, there's 2 public hearing processes that would take place. The comprehensive plan in Arizona has to come first, so the comprehensive plan process would be completed, then the zoning process would take place afterwards. So you're looking at possibly 14 to 16 months for approval. Our comprehensive plan here is just showing the blue and purple already in the comprehensive plan. There's a lot of acreage devoted to the purple, which is our employment land use category. And then anywhere you see the blue areas, that is also where a solar facility could go right now. Now the small facilities, which is anything that is an accessory use to an existing residential or commercial or industrial development, there's no comprehensive plan review. There's no public hearing process. There's no mail-outs. There's no public involvement. Basically, they just have to meet the basic zoning requirements. So they're treated as accessory uses. We look at setbacks, building permit, electrical permit, and then it's off and running. The code that we have right now really, it's open, it's wide open, and it's ready to be used by anyone who has the space on their lot to conduct that type of use. In particular, if folks want to dive into our zoning ordinance, it's Chapter 2.210 of our zoning ordinance, and I can certainly provide a link to that. Now, where are we now in terms of utility grade type of or large capacity facilities? There are 2 projects in Pinal County that have entitlements, and one has not gone through the zoning process. It's located on state of Arizona land, so they're currently working with the state to finalize lease agreements, but they've got comprehensive plan designation. One facility is up and running in the town of Florence, and it's operated by SRP, and there's their website there. It's called Copper Crossing, and there's details of that facility. It's fairly large, and it's a great example of a functioning solar facility in Pinal County. And then of equal important note, there are several that are co-located on existing industrial sites and power plants. One is Frito-Lay, which is probably the best example, which is actually located in the city of Casa Grande now, but they have co-located a multiple megawatt facility to help create sun chips, and they also have a very green agenda with their production methods. And then also APS's Saguaro generating station, which is down towards Marana. There's also some solar facilities there as well. So where are we going in terms of some of the efforts we were trying to do to keep the solar idea moving forward in Pinal County? And I guess not to be too much of a downer, but we as staff and the Green Committee, Sustainable Task Force, excuse me, a proposal was brought forward to the P&Z Commission to allow the utility-grade solar facilities to be reviewed as a minor amendment rather than that major process. The minor could be run concurrently with zoning, which would almost cut that entire process in half. Actually, it's 40% of the time. Unfortunately, the P&Z did not approve that proposal, but I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. Also, I understand that there's some grumblings in Phoenix with the legislature that the power companies are looking to either reduce the effectiveness of that ACC decision to require solar energy or remove it altogether. That did not get approved as part of this last legislative session, but I'm sure that they'll be constantly thinking about that as we move forward. And then lastly, the utility providers are a little less aggressive than they were, well, actually a lot less aggressive than they were 2 to 3 years ago. The RFPs have stopped coming out. I think they want to take a look-see at how the Copper Crossing facility is going, and then also one of the other facilities I mentioned earlier in the proposal. They haven't moved forward with any additional entitlements beyond the zoning, so we haven't seen any site plans or building permits submitted. Now, room for improvement. There's always room for improvement. I think a key couple points would be keep the Sustainable Task Force engaged. Get that group, keep them active. Don't let them slip slide away. Keep them, contact them, get them going, and make sure they are still active in the community. I would like to revisit the minor amendment process for utility grade facilities. I think let some time pass since that last decision, maybe bring it back up and reestablish some of the finer points. The only tool that the county has for incentivizing certain land uses is time. There's been some state laws and some court cases in Arizona that all the county can really do is say, we like you, but all we can help you with is reducing the time it takes to process some of your applications. So the staff's basic thought would be approach the decision makers again. We've had a recent change in our Board of Supervisors. It's gone from 3 members to 5 members. Maybe the policy direction is a little bit different. I think adding a solar orientation design guideline or requirement for residential development and/or subdivisions is something that we could add to encourage solar use in a residential setting. That combined with the fact that it's already an allowed use in residential, I think would help push that forward. Take the opportunity to champion state and federal incentive programs. I know that our Board of Supervisors and our commissioners are very active and we have some representatives with the ICMA actually to keep that on the legislators' policy agenda. And then really open discussion with the incorporated towns and cities in our county to make sure we're all on board with this solar idea and making sure that it's, if not as friendly as Pinal County, that there's at least some visioning and some ideas in their planning documents that forward the idea of solar. That concludes my presentation. Kent, if you had anything you wanted to add, I guess we'll save questions to the end, but that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think next we're going to hear from Nate Geisler from Ann Arbor. The floor is all yours, Nate.
Great, thank you, and thanks, Steve and Kent, for that intro and into my topic, and thanks, David and Aaron, for inviting Ann Arbor to take part today. Just to give a little background as well on Ann Arbor, many people probably know we're home to the University of Michigan, and a population of around 114,000 that includes full-time students. And we're, again, located generally in the metro, just outside of the metro Detroit area in southeast Michigan. A little bit of a background on energy and solar in Ann Arbor. We actually can trace this back quite a ways to the first energy plan coming out of the city in the early 80s following the energy crises of the 70s. The city took it pretty seriously, established an energy commission not long after that in 1985 after the drafting of the energy plan, which looked at both municipal and community level energy efficiency and renewables as well as energy conservation. This led to the establishment of the city's energy office to both staff the Energy Commission and advise and work with City Council on emerging and existing goals to promote renewables like solar here in town. Related to that, the Energy Challenge in 2006 and 2011 when it was updated came from our mayor and council to really push renewable energy and greenhouse gas reductions, again, both at the municipal and community level, and just below that, just to drive that point home again. A few years ago, around the time when I was coming on in 2009 here at the city, a shift was kind of underway to make sure that the Energy Office and the Commission, while keeping a focus on municipal operations from the early 80s to about 2009, to not lose sight of our community goals. And this also had a lot to do with the fact that much of the low-hanging fruit had been reached with regards to energy efficiency. And so we've more recently begun a new sort of branding effort with our website, a2energy.org, which is going to appear in all the slides going forward, which is alongside our older logo for the Energy Office there at left. We're pretty sure that's a windmill in the sun. Some people hazard a guess or two, but we've updated some of the branding as we do more and more work in the community. So just a little background on what the Energy Office is. In terms of the solar plan, which I'm going to discuss, the background to that really dates back to 2007, and a lot of credit is due to the U.S. Department of Energy, as we were one of 25 eventual cities that were awarded the designation of a Solar America City. This was a grant that we received, over $200,000 in funding and technical assistance, as well as a $232,000 local match that the city brought forth with other partners for this partnership. And a major deliverable of the Solar Cities grant that we received was to develop a solar plan to identify barriers and identify opportunities as well to really advance solar here at the municipal and the community level. And at the time of the award, it's estimated there were less than 100 kilowatts of installed, at least known photovoltaics, 19 solar hot water heating installations. Again, Ann Arbor is a modest city, fairly large by Michigan standards, but again, 114,000 people. We did, though, have, again, these specific goals with respect to renewable energy and had a resolution even to support 5,000 solar roofs that came through the mayor as well. Net metering at the time in Michigan was not a very strong incentive, and not too many people were taking advantage of it. So again, the main drive behind, or one of the main points to our Solar Cities application was the development of this solar plan to identify and remove barriers and increase solar energy use. Captured as well in the partnership was an attempt to improve city regulation and code, train installers, increase large-scale solar installations on city buildings and other highly visible areas, and again, establish a sort of new partnership and means to address the community. Just a little context here in Michigan. We're not Arizona, and this is the Leslie Science and Nature Center in our town. And on the left, we have a 2.5 kilowatt mounted system, and to the right, it's easy to miss. We've got a 2.5 kilowatt thin film photovoltaic system. And this is, just some of the interesting findings as we were putting the plan together. This was one of the buildings that the DOE, as part of their technical assistance, commissioned, and this was kind of a pretty gray day to begin with, so despite the fact that half of the system was covered in snow and not really operating, the system on the right was probably not outperforming it a whole lot given that. But despite, the sort of assumed lack of solar in the state of Michigan or in Ann Arbor specifically, it's been estimated that we received 25% or more solar insolation than Germany, which of course is the world's leader in installed photovoltaic capacity. So we're not Arizona, but we still think we've got a good solar resource that we should take advantage of. Specific to the plan, one of the partners in the Solar America Cities grant proposal was the Clean Energy Coalition, who is a spinoff actually of the Ann Arbor Energy Office, and work we've done for some years on clean cities initiatives through the EPA. They've since spun off into a standalone consultant and nonprofit entity employing several people and doing a lot of good work in the area. We were working with them to actually draft the plan, and they did a lot in terms of identifying the national best practices, identifying resources that at the time were in place, integrating their findings and developing recommendations to put into the plan and to present to the Energy Commission and our City Council while working with staff. The photos here are just to demonstrate that, again, this is Ann Arbor and home to the U of M. A solar car there to the right. The solar car team is active pretty much yearly on different events that are happening, and the image on the lower left is the MISO house at the local botanical gardens in town. It's a modular unit that is meant to produce more energy than it consumes, so have a lot of smart folks in town interested in advancing a lot of these ideas, not just in the conventional way of putting solar on a building. Just a little bit here on the plan's organization, and a little later I'll have the URL up for folks who want to actually download and look at the full plan. But again, fairly straightforward in terms of a functional plan here. There's an introduction and again, going through some of the benefits and barriers, a profile of Ann Arbor, again, laying out a lot of what these best practices are, whether it's financial incentives, training and education, various outreach that can be done, and again, the meat of it being 8 recommendations within the plan that the city should consider to really bring about the kind of change we're after. And again, this lays out the remaining contents found within the plan. A lot of resources. The plan was completed in 2010, and so it's still largely relevant. I mean, I had a slide up about a 1981 energy plan that you think would be out of date now, but it's surprisingly still relevant, and I think the solar plan will be as well, even though it's now a few years old. And the recommendations are still important and really do ring true. So specific to these recommendations, I have pictured here the chair of our Energy Commission. up top, and below there is a bit on our PACE program, which I'll mention in a second. In terms of implementing the actual plan, how do we do it? It's not always obvious and easy, but having a standing group like the Energy Commission that's meeting every month, discussing renewable energy issues, is very aware of the plan, is very helpful. And the ability to have the plan and invoke the plan as we do various resolutions that we send to our city council, which we've done recently with the community solar pilot that I'll mention a little later. This has really helped, as well as a couple other entities that came about as part of our Solar Cities work, and I'll also discuss a little bit later. In terms of designing financial incentives, this is certainly a challenge. How do you pay for and overcome the upfront cost of solar? The prices are dropping drastically, as many people are aware, but it's still an upfront hurdle for many folks. Ann Arbor is the first city in Michigan to develop and close on PACE projects. PACE is a whole webinar in and of itself, but it stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy, and it's a way to finance energy efficiency, but also certain renewables. Of the 4 first projects that we have through our PACE program, one of them does include solar shingles, which we're pretty excited. That project is wrapping up in the coming months here. The city does advocate for state-level policy change. Our council has passed various resolutions supporting an increase in our renewable portfolio standard. Our attorney's office regularly comments and offers input to our Public Service Commission on things like interconnection, where we think there can be improvement. And I mentioned PACE. We were very involved in actually getting enabling legislation passed in Michigan to allow for that financial incentive to take place. I actually jumped over, I realized, solar permitting there, number 3. Certainly an issue and something we're continuing to work through with the Energy Commission. Permitting can be in some ways less of an issue than the tax assessment issue that we find, where trying to determine whether this is property tax or personal property, these kinds of questions that the state is still wrestling with, and something that we want to help people in our town who are putting up solar not get dinged too hard on their tax bill. Integrating solar into city infrastructure and culture. I'm going to jump through a couple slides in a moment to show what we've done there. Consideration of solar access laws and robust building codes. We're limited in Michigan to following the state code, but we're always looking for ways to push that. The Energy Commission has considered solar access regulations in town. We've not put forth a formal resolution or policy recommendation just yet. This is coming together at the same time of a multi-year urban forestry management plan, and we are Tree City USA, as we like to say, and while we have many areas that are suitable for solar, we also have a lot of well-established what we call landmark trees, and making sure that in the broader sustainability work that we do here at the city, we aren't working at cross purposes. So an interesting thing and something we continue to look at. Number 7 here on the solar plan recommendations is creating solar outreach, and part of the A2 Energy work that we're doing is sort of creating this portal through a2energy.org. It's not specific to solar per se, but it's tailorable to an effort like that, and there are folks on our commission who are interested in doing that, and something we are continuing to refine. And similarly, we have an A2 Energy contractor partnership network through A2 Energy in our PACE program that is a way to help support workforce development and solar installers in the area as well. So I mentioned in terms of getting some of this infrastructure in place, up top is a 10 kilowatt system. The top 2 slides going left to right at our farmers market. This was done during the time of our Solar Cities Award. We also have 2 fire stations equipped with solar hot water heating systems. Lower right is a shade structure that also has 4 kilowatts of photovoltaics on it. That was put up recently. And this very somewhat striking picture, I think, at the left is our Municipal Center. Some people think it's an ugly building. It grows on me every day, and I think it's a pretty charming shot here with the sunset behind it. But this is a LEED Gold facility. The portion on the left is a new police courts addition. The building on right was the existing City Hall that was retrofitted. Up top there in the circles are a large collector for both solar hot water heating, domestic hot water heating, and a preheat for our boiler system within City Hall. And pictured at right is the head of our Downtown Development Authority and one of dozens of solar-powered off-the-grid parking meters that we now have so people can use their credit card. These have been quite popular. And the DDA, it should be said, has been very supportive of a lot of the work here in Ann Arbor and really helped, did fund the Farmers Market photovoltaic project that I just showed in the last slide. So we're glad to have an active DDA funding a lot of this work. So this is just a graph here of installed capacity of solar here in Ann Arbor. 2007, again, was the time of the award. 2008 was the passage of Michigan's Renewable Portfolio Standard regulation to require utilities to supply 10% of their electric capacity through renewables. And in 2010, I mentioned the completion of the solar plan. We've had a big growth in recent years and even months here with the price of solar dropping. 2 large installations at the University of Michigan have sent us over 1 megawatt of installed capacity. And while if you were to do a multivariate regression saying, well, how did the solar plan have everything to do with this? You know, I can't with a straight face say that necessarily, but it's certainly part of the coming together of a lot of factors, and I think did and will continue to play a role in sort of guiding the discussion that we're having here in Ann Arbor and making sure that solar fits in with our community and we continue to grow the capacity that we have. And I don't see this line plateauing anytime soon as we continue to work through the recommendations of the plan and promote solar in many different ways. To get your own copy, I put a URL up here at a2gov.org/energy/solar. Again, it's a fairly lengthy document that is going to lay out more and then some than you might want, but it's a great resource document, and I know did draw heavily on some of the resources that we had from the U.S. Department of Energy, but it is a good resource to look to and something to consider if you're looking to develop a functional plan aside from or in addition to your master plan or another means of incorporating solar into a local plan. So where are we going? Just to wrap it up, in a moment here I'm going to show a slide of Exceed Energy, which was a spin-off from our Solar Cities work that's helping to implement the solar plan. We recently passed a similar initiative through a resolution to our City Council, again invoking and referring to the solar plan to create a pilot for community solar where several residents can contribute to an installation either in their neighborhood or outside somewhere because of the limitations that they might have through orientation, shading, even certain upfront costs to fund an entire system, a way to contribute to a community level solar. And this is a phenomenon that's sort of spreading throughout the country and to varying degrees depending on utility participation. And right below that, I do have the utilities involvement. We're talking more and more with our utility, Detroit Edison, on some of their work with their solar currents program. A very strong incentive existed in between 2009 and 2011 that really had a lot to do with ramping up that chart from before. They're now still finalizing some of the larger scale commercial installs, and we're looking to possibly take advantage of that initiative and work closely with DTE. Just a final tip here, having an Energy Commission, a group that meets regularly to keep these kind of things active. I know presenters before me mentioned the sustainability task force, something like this where you can keep the plan from just existing on the shelf and collecting dust, and having our Energy Commission inform City Council and think about all things solar and renewable really helps to keep this on the forefront. This is hot off the press. We've got a 3-kilowatt system going up on the landmark Michigan Theater in downtown. And this is part of the donor-driven Exceed Energy program. At the bottom there, you can learn a little bit more about Exceed Energy at exceedenergy.org. Pretty simple model. Like community solar, if you can't do it yourself, do you want to donate to a prominent nonprofit installation like the Michigan Theaters or many of the others that we have downtown? It took some time to get off the ground, but we view the Exceed Energy and their advisory committee as one of the implementers, in addition to the Energy Commission and staff and other local advocates that are really helping to see through a lot of the recommendations in our plan. And this is a snapshot of the local article describing the community solar pilot that I mentioned a moment ago, where we're looking to work closely with DTE to make sure this can happen in Michigan. So that is what I have to cover, and happy to answer any questions that come up. And again, thanks for listening, and thanks for having us participate.
Well, terrific. Thanks, Nate. And now we have reached the time in our program. We're going to take some questions from our audience. So if you have not submitted your questions yet, please feel free to go ahead and do so by clicking the Q&A at the top of your screen there. So the first question we have up here, first question is for Pinal County, and we're going to ask a terminology question, but then a more substantive question along with it. So we had a couple of questions come in asking about a couple of terms that Steve, you had used in your presentation. Someone wanted to know what PAD stands for, and somebody also wanted to know what you meant by that you had two projects that were entitled. And then the more substantive question is, I wonder if you could expand a little bit more on some of the specific solar goals and action items in the plan, and maybe tell us a little bit about where you're at with the implementation of those goals.
Oh, okay. Well, the first one, PAD, is Planned Area Development. That is basically a zoning overlay district that creates a special development plan and use. So the zoning would be approved for a 10 megawatt solar facility with a specific development plan. Any changes to that would have to go back through a public hearing process. So it would be the only allowed use on the property, and it has to look a lot like what they submitted as part of the public hearing process. Then with the entitlements, what I meant by that is that a solar facility would have to have three things taken care of. One, it'd have to have the proper comprehensive plan designation. Two, it would have to have the proper zoning, and then three, it would have to have a building permit or electrical permit along those lines. So entitlements, in that sense, means that it's accomplished one of those three steps in our process. Let's see, the other question was about
some of the specific goals and action items from the plan. If you could just unpack that a little bit for us, maybe.
Sure, and let me go to that section in our code right now. The specific requirements would be, let's see, policy would be energy. Well, in particular, for those who want to look in our comprehensive plan in Chapter 7, page 269, there are goals, and page 272, renewable energy sources and energy generation that, let's see, we've got goals improving energy efficiency of structures in Pinal County, improving energy efficiency of Pinal government. There are reduce energy demand through community design, which use smart site design, solar orientation. Let's see, what else would go with that? Expanding, well, the primary one, I forgot that one. Expanding renewable energy in Pinal County, which is supporting small-scale renewable projects, supporting statewide policies, and this is right in the comprehensive plan. Work with developers and energy providers. So there's a whole battery of things that deal directly with renewable energy goals.
Oh, great. And could you maybe comment very briefly as a final thing here, just what is the status of implementation on some of these more specific items?
Let's see. The one in Florence is already up and running, as mentioned earlier. The facility down in the southern part of the county that has zoning hasn't come up yet. They haven't come in for building permit. And the other facility on state land has comprehensive plan designation, but no zoning and no permitting. So in terms of moving forward with actually, there's only a couple examples in reality, but I think that it's moving forward in a positive way.
All right. The next question here is for Nate. You mentioned that Ann Arbor is a designated tree city, and one of our questioners here wants to know about some of the actions that Ann Arbor has taken to minimize the conflicts between solar and trees.
Well, just this week, I think it might have been yesterday, on a related webinar, I think, to this, we sat through and listened to some folks working on this very issue. This is myself and our urban forester, Carrie Gray. And, it's been an interesting thing. She's been working on the community urban forestry management plan for a few years now, and it's coming close to wrapping up. And she's been clear to identify the issue of solar access within that plan, and to make sure that, again, we're not working at cross purposes. We work in a unit here called Systems Planning that's an interdisciplinary group, and it really allows for some of these potential conflicts or potential opportunities for coordination to happen a lot easier, and whether that's with tree planting and solar or electric vehicles and our transportation planning staff. And per that conversation with the forester, I said, well, there's a little branch that's creeping up to the far left side of our PD system over at the farmer's market. How about we go walk down there on Friday and see if we can't prune that out of the way? So the group that we have allows for, I think, quick, simple things like that to happen, but also for there to be considerations in the planning that we're doing. And that was true of the plan that she's working on, the solar plan, and also our recently adopted climate action plan, which was finished in December of 2012, where, again, all these things are factored in together. There are a lot of carbon benefits that can happen from a lot of sustainability practices, but they may have potential impacts. And so, as I mentioned, we don't have firm solar access zoning yet in Michigan. We probably have stronger protections right now for trees. We have developers must comply with our landmark tree policy, which is sort of a mitigation policy if any trees are removed on a site, large, older trees. And so it's kind of an ongoing thing, an ongoing dialogue that we have, and it's been very valuable to be in close proximity to our urban forester. She's literally 15 feet away from me, so these conversations happen a lot.
Well, great, yeah, and so no one thinks that I'm too disingenuous. The webinar that Nate was just referring to, actually I was a participant in that webinar, and you can find out more information about that at solaroutreach.org. And also I want to put a plug in again for the briefing paper series that APA did. We do have a briefing paper that's specifically on the topic of solar and other competing priorities, which includes trees, historic resources, and also urban redevelopment. I want to move on now to a question that I want to pose to all three of our speakers here kind of collectively, and maybe see if we can get them all to weigh in here. So we have a questioner who's wondering what sort of political, economic, social, and technological barriers you might all have experienced in adopting solar energy plans and implementing photovoltaics. And maybe, Aaron, if you could start, and then we'll move on to Steve and maybe finish up with Nate.
I guess that for barriers that people come across, I think a lot of times that would just be in permitting processes and fees, and trying to make sure that there's a more streamlined process in place for developers to go through that process, because if those aren't in place, then people aren't going to really take the time or make the effort to go with trying to get a facility installed. So I think that's one of the bigger ones I can throw out there.
Steve, and what are your thoughts on maybe some of the biggest barriers that you've run into?
Well, at this point, with the residential and accessory use type facilities, the smaller scale things, I think there haven't been too many barriers because of the way our regulations are posed right now, where it's treated as an accessory use. On the utility side, though, I think a couple barriers are one that issue I mentioned about the time, where the utility companies and their private partners look at time as a major drawback. That 16-month process can negatively affect business practices. And then I think on a larger scale, I think really the county has very little control over this, is the activity of the utility companies. That the ball is really in their court to sort of forward this agenda of utility grade power generation. So that's kind of been a barrier in terms of the utility companies themselves sort of backing away from this effort. I'm sure that they have their programs and their incentive programs themselves, but at least from a zoning perspective, in terms of intensity, from a couple of years ago, we haven't seen the interest.
And Nate, could I get you to weigh in on the barriers here?
Sure, I was about to do that. Those mentioned are great ones and certainly still relevant. Briefly, I mentioned in my talk the issue of property assessment, something we're still reckoning with here. I think perhaps even less so than the soft costs involved with permitting and some of the other regulations is the concern some folks have and the sticker shock on their taxes that they might later receive. And so I think we're close to getting over that impasse, but that's nonetheless an issue. I also mentioned DTE, our local utility, had some fantastic incentives between 2009 and 2011. Incentives still exist through DTE, but they've been scaled back into more of a lottery system that's a little bit more complex. That really drove a number of installations. I believe the count was over 60 in Ann Arbor that signed up for their solar currents program as it was running. I think you mentioned political barriers as well as economic. Politically, again, we're pretty fortunate to have a mayor and council that have been quite involved and supportive of most things solar, so that's been less of a barrier. Just reference again in our plan, the significant barriers that are outlined are these soft costs, the upfront cost itself of PV photovoltaics, which is dropping, these financing issues and support. I think siting and aesthetic issues are still a concern. We have a large system installed in the north part of town where it's a large stretch, but people see the backside of the solar, and so that didn't give them the greatest taste of a large system, a 500 plus kW install. And so really thinking about those siting issues and aesthetic concerns, that while the community might be supportive of it and maybe even more familiar with it in a place like Arizona, it's still kind of a new thing for Michigan, and really being conscious of placement is very important, and just overcoming that knowledge, and that can be done through the right kind of public engagement early on.
Well, thanks, Nate. And for the sake of time, we're going to have to let that be the final word. I want to thank all of our panelists for a great discussion and our audience for some great questions. And I want to remind everyone that this webinar is part of a larger series, and we hope you'll join us for the next program, which is titled Promoting Solar Energy Use Through Zoning, on November 1st. At this point, I just put a brief survey up on your screen. Please take a moment to provide your feedback on today's program. This feedback is vital to us to help us improve future webinar programming. Thanks, everybody. I hope you have a great day, and you can disconnect as soon as you complete the survey.